Hello, and welcome to this Spotlight on the Expert in Divorce. And this is one area where I think that we could all learn a little bit more about the various professionals that support men and women going through divorce. So, for my first guest, I would like to introduce you to Lisa Johnson. She is the co founder of Been There, Got Out. She's a high conflict divorce coach and certified domestic violence advocate. She has represented herself through multiple court cases post divorce. And Lisa was also instrumental in helping to pass Jennifer's Law in Connecticut, which expanded the legal definition of domestic violence to include coercive control. So, Lisa, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be back with you, Marty.
Well, and I so loved our podcast. I got a lot of feedback, and people said we want to learn more. And so this whole idea of allowing my guests to share their expertise in a longer framework than we have to do on the podcast. So, Lisa, it's always nice though to have the time to kind of speak about yourself and what you do, because my little intro is so brief. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why this is your area of passion?
Okay, well, so yes, I am a high conflict divorce coach. Now we call ourselves strategists because I feel like we do strategy more than anything. And with my male partner, Chris, who's also my life partner, we have Been There, Got Out, and we say we focus on helping people get out of toxic relationships, high conflict separations, divorces, custody battles are our specialty, as well as co-parenting hell. So they have the chance of getting the best outcome in family court and beyond. And the beyond is important because ours are the 10% of the cases that go on for years, that cost loads of money, that people say, I cannot live like this.
Yeah.
And so we do what we can to make sure that their ex does not wear them down and bleed them dry financially, because it is a long, exhausting process. And it's so important to get support, because when you're in it, it often feels like you're the only one dealing with this kind of crazy.
Well, and for most people, if you are in this, like you say, divorce hell situation, you are the only one that you know that's going through it. This is not common. Like Lisa said, this is about 10% of divorce cases. So you think of the millions of divorces that happen every year. This is like a minute fraction. But if you're one of those people, it is, like you said, it's emotionally draining, it's financially draining, and there it's damaging to your kids if you have children when you're going through this. So yeah. So can you talk a little bit before we get started? I know you've got a little, some information to share with us, and maybe this is part of it, but this term coercive control is coming up more and more. And I think there's 4 or 5 states now that recognize
Seven.
seven. All
Yes.
right. So can you explain in really easy to understand terms exactly what coercive control is?
Okay. So first, domestic violence, people often get the idea that it's physical, that unless somebody hit you or did something like that, that it's not very significant. So coercive control is all of that invisible abuse. It's basically a pattern of someone's behavior to make you feel like you're dependent on them and you can't function like a free human being. And this is not something just in America where we value liberty, but all across the world, where it's like little behaviors where you feel like you can't ever kind of go not obey the other person. There's a lot of parts to it, but generally coercive control are the kinds of abuse that you can't see. So for example, financial abuse, which is present in 99% of abusive relationships, psychological and verbal abuse, sexual abuse, something called revenge porn, where somebody is threatening if you leave them that they're going to post sexual images of you online, which don't just damage you, but often your family and your community. Legal abuse, that we say that's fortunately and unfortunately our specialty. Stalking, isolation, things like that. That basically, I mean, coercive control is like a huge thing with all those kinds of behaviors. And now in Connecticut, as well as 6 other states, Massachusetts was the last one to expand their laws to include coercive control. But now those types of abuse have to be taken more seriously, especially when looking at restraining orders and custody issues. So it used to just be physical harm or imminent threat of physical harm. Now it's like, let's look at what else is going on and take that into account. And so we're very pleased to have these new laws.
Yeah, and it's kind of a natural progression. I mean, I was a domestic violence client advocate for many years in the early part of the 2000s and early to mid. And one of the things that, we could talk to women or men that came in about violence and about this coercive control and threats and financial abuse. But then you would walk to an attorney, or even our own agency attorney would go, well, we know it's happening, but technically there's nothing on the books if somebody, gives you an allowance, if somebody demands to see receipts, if somebody gives you a prepaid debit card and that's all the money you can access and there's only $10 on that card every week or whatever it may be, or doesn't allow you to talk to your friends or family. There's nothing, they're not violating any laws. So what I'm hearing is with this element of coercive control now getting recognized, those kind of behaviors can be brought up in a court and can be used to show that there is this type of control that's going on in the relationship.
Yeah, I mean, and actually it was pretty amazing, but in the latter part of my dozens and dozens and dozens of court appearances, I got before the judge that in Connecticut, which actually she had ruled on Jennifer Dulos's case, which was one of the Jennifer women who had died as a result of stuff that happened in court. And so I was frightened, but I was arguing Jennifer's law to this judge, this very judge, and saying how legal abuse specifically had impacted my life and having to go to court for years and spending so much time and money and energy, and that it is a form of coercive control. And then I said, I need to have, because you always need to know what to ask for. You can't just cite a law, but to say I need to have, moving forward, orders with teeth. Otherwise, we would just continue being back in court on and on and on indefinitely. And that judge, actually, I was so scared. I thought, oh, she's going to hate me because I participated in Jennifer's law and whatever. But she gave me the best orders ever. Like, she gave me beyond what I had asked for. And since those orders, my ex, after 9-ish years at the time, finally started complying.
Right.
So I was really, really grateful. And I was so grateful to be able to use Jennifer's law to argue, but it was scary to argue it to the very judge that had ruled on Jennifer's case.
Well, and I think the thing is, and I know there's some people in the high conflict divorce sphere, industry, whatever you want to call it, or sector, that really think that everybody in the court system has no compassion, has no capacity to understand this, has their own issues that they're dealing with. But I think that's only one perspective. There's also the perspective that there are good, caring, compassionate professionals in there who do want to make changes, but a judge can't create laws out of their own head. Like, they can't, even if a judge sees that something is amiss, they can't necessarily rule on it if there's no legal violation. Even in a civil case, there's parameters as to what a judge can rule on. So laws like this open up those parameters and do provide that opportunity for judges.
Right. I think, there's definitely a very loud, vocal group of people that go on about bias and corruption in the court. And I know myself, it's a broken or at least a damaged court system. But to make statements like that, I think is very unhealthy for people dealing with it, because it's sort of this dooms, like self-fulfilling prophecy. Why should I even bother? Because there's so much corruption and bias. And I completely disagree with that. I mean, everyone by nature has their own biases and prejudices. But to me, it comes down to, and I don't know if you know, but I used to be a high school English teacher and I am a professional writer. It comes down to persuasive argument. It comes down to understanding how to persuade someone to see things from your perspective and get what you need to get and get out of there. And I remember at a conference years ago, I was able to meet Evan Stark, who's the author of the book Coercive Control. He's since passed away. But one thing that he said really stood out to me, and that is that he believes in some ways that it's a sort of bottoms up approach, that it is on us as litigants to come in with very compelling cases to convince judges what exactly is happening. Labels are nothing, but patterns of behavior over time and the impact that has on our lives and on our children's lives, that's what makes a difference. And
Right.
so I have personally experienced that, being able to persuade a judge, especially that particular judge in Connecticut, was amazing. And there were other judges that I was able to persuade. I mean, granted, that's my training and my background. But to me, it's the art of persuasion. And that's so much of what Chris and I teach. It's also understanding the ethos of the court, like where you are in this system. So Chris came up with this quote. It's, if you go into family court and you present as Mama Bear, you're going to get bitten by the system. So people come in with guns blazing saying, I'm going to educate my judge and tell him this is what they do very, very poorly, because they don't understand that it's almost like this Wizard of Oz scenario where the judge is the wizard and you're Dorothy and you're begging. So you have to understand your role and you have to be very deferential. But I think there's still a lot of room to get what you need and get out of there. And we've had tremendous success, as have our clients, but it is not easy and it is a long process. And it's often filled with triumphs as well as what we call gut punches along the way. But for me, I feel like justice was finally served and karma was served along the way. And now it's like, who even knew that my case would get published in the Connecticut Law Journalist? So it's case law for the state. And that was not the case with that particular judge. That was on the appellate level, where my ex had appealed 4 times. I was pro se. So I argued for myself and I won, and it was notable enough to be published, which I've been told is a huge honor for any attorney, and it's unheard of for a pro se. So I think stories like that, success stories, need to be shared more often, because also we have to remember, like 95 to 98% of cases, even high conflict cases, are settled outside of court. And so there's so much that we can do outside of court, even in domestic violence situations, with the right professionals involved and everything else. But there's ways to do it where we keep the power in our own hands as much as we can, and then use the courts for as little as possible.
Right.
So I have
Yeah.
a much more optimistic look on being able to get what you need in court. And again, like so many of our clients have done really well, not just those with attorneys, but many of them who have been representing themselves too. And unfortunately, people are forced to get to that point because you just run out of money.
Yeah, so that's another area of expertise or focus for you, is something called legal abuse. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because I see so many because I also work with people in high conflict divorce situations. I see so many of my clients come in with the very unrealistic expectation that when you get your divorce decree, everything's done. That's it. You won, or you got what you got, and you're walking away, and that's it. You're never going to hear from the partner again. Can you talk a little bit about what legal abuse is and what people should be prepared for? You know, that old saying, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. But talk a little bit about what legal abuse is, Lisa, if you wouldn't mind.
And like you said, I was one of those people who was like, if I could just finish this divorce, then I'll have peace. We always say divorce is just part one, especially in our community where it just goes on and on and on and the anger doesn't dissipate. So legal abuse, I only discovered like a few years ago that there was a term for what I was dealing with, because I thought I don't know anybody else in a situation like this, maybe like one person online that I had met. So I found the term legal abuse, and it's also known as litigation abuse, paper abuse because of all the motions filed, judicial terrorism, or my favorite is stalking through the court.
Right.
And so technically, there's 5 ways that people legally abuse others. So they basically weaponize the legal system to control, harass, intimidate, coerce, and impoverish a victim. And so there's really 2 types of ways that legal abuse occurs. So the first is what's called vexatious or frivolous litigation. And that's where your ex is filing all kinds of motions, often to try to reduce custody, take your custody time away, or reduce either child support or alimony. So it's always money and kids that are used. And then the other side, so with that, our clients are forced to go back to court to spend tons of money having to fight these claims all the time. It's basically like a form of terrorism where it just when's the next bomb that's about to drop. And so our clients live in a constant sense of dread of like, oh my gosh, what's next? And I know when I was in the middle of all this, it was like every time I would look at my email, if I saw anything from the court or opposing counsel, I'd be like, no, even though things were going my way, it was still this fear, like opening the mailbox. What if it's a terrible order? What if the judge changed their mind? Like, what if this awfulizing? It's horrible to live like that. And that's what our clients live like for years. The other thing, which is the way that my case has been more, is when the other side does not comply with the court orders or the legal agreement. And so then it's on me or someone like me to constantly bring my ex back to court to make that person comply. And so that also has been exhausting. And, I always say like probably about 100 court appearances in the past 7 to 8 years trying to get someone to comply. And you think like, how hard is it? But when, judges end up, these cases go on for so long, so judges change. And then you have to like catch up a new person with it. And my case also happened partially over COVID. So it was like, oh, we're going to start all over again. Oh, we're going to start part of it in another state. And then my ex did the thing, which one judge noted, of creating confusion where none exists in an attempt to wear me down. And so that's one of the strategies that opposing counsel do to people in these situations is you're going back and saying, please just make this person follow the order. And then they'll bully you and make you feel like you're in the wrong for even going to collect the relief that you were entitled to. So it's very exhausting.
And I think you have hit on something that I think is really critical for people to understand. Whether you're a man or woman going through divorce, it doesn't matter. If you are dealing with a high conflict individual, they have their own set of rules, and they often in their heads don't recognize the court, don't recognize the orders that are in front of them. And yes, technically, when you bring them back for failing to follow the orders, you should be thinking, okay, well, I'm going to get my legal fees are going to be assigned to them and they'll be required to pay. Well, guess what? That's just another order they ignore. And you are the one that's left trying to get this money, even though the court may have ordered them to pay your legal fees. You know what? Your attorney doesn't have to collect from them. You have to collect the money and give it to your attorney. So it becomes this vicious cycle where you're almost spending, you're just escalating the amount of money that you're spending, and you're most likely not going to get those things back. So,
Right. So we often talk about something called the cost benefit analysis, like how much is it going to cost me to get whatever it is I'm going for? And it's not just in attorney's fees and court costs. That's just the actual money you can see. But how much is it going to cost my psychological health? How much is it going to cost my time? How much is it going to cost my ability to parent?
right.
Like my divorce took a year, and my lawyer was lovely, and I paid him tons of money because he was my best friend because I didn't know about other resources. But after it ended, he said the day of the divorce, your ex is not going to comply. He's not going to listen. So you have to already start planning your paper trail and to go back by yourself. Because if you use me, he's going to continue to financially decimate you. I mean, I'm going to be paying back my loans for decades on just that divorce. And so going pro se since that time, I know I've saved like well over $1 million in the process. So,
and just think of that number, $1 million. Like it's, yeah. I mean, I work with clients. I've got clients right now that are $200,000 and $300,000 in legal fees, and they haven't even got to the divorce yet. They're 3 years in, and they're still dealing with this constantly revolving attorneys. And now here is one thing that I want to throw out there is, you can't control the motions that the other side is going to file, but you can learn how to respond to them on your own. You can, learn how to do some of the basic paperwork. And that's one of the things that you help people do through your organization, through your training and your courses, right, Lisa?
Yeah. So we're developing a big online program of courses now. We're little glitches with a video editor, but hopefully it'll be done in the next few months. Yeah, I mean, our whole thing is empowerment through education. Like we often say, people have come out of these coercively controlling relationships where they've given, not to blame them, but you've given your authority to somebody else. They've taken advantage. You get out, and then it's almost like you have to be careful not to keep repeating the cycle and say, now I'm going to pay a lawyer $15,000 minimum, and they're going to save my life. So we come in and we're like, no, 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 these are the cases that most lawyers don't deal with very often. So it's on you, and we call it taking strategic oversight, to sort of manage your case like a business and to stay on top of things, like to know what motion is coming up, not to just say, I don't know, my lawyer's taking it. Like, you need to know exactly what's going on. You need to proofread everything.
Right.
Lawyers are lovely people sometimes, but everybody makes mistakes, especially with the details of cases like these. And so you need to read everything. You need to make sure that what's in there is there. It's a more collaborative approach with an attorney than, say, a normal case. But it also is an opportunity for you to learn how to advocate for yourself. I'm not saying that you shouldn't follow your lawyer's advice and you should question everything, but you should understand what is going on so that you can really be an active part of it, rather than being buffeted around in this, crazy divorce industry.
Yeah. And one thing that, and I know we're going to get to some tips maybe that you might want to share, but one thing that I always caution people is, if you think you're going into a high conflict divorce, or your partner has a history of this, it's been in the relationship, you recognize that there was coercive control, even though you may not have got it at the time it was happening. Now you're aware that this is what was going on. You don't necessarily want the high-powered, super aggressive attorney, because what they do is every motion your ex files, they file, and it just becomes this cycle of dueling motions. And that is just money flying out of your bank account. The other thing that and maybe you could speak to this, is how a lot of attorneys now, I was just at a law conference not too long ago where attorneys are saying, if a client walks through the door and says, my partner is a narcissist and I have no money, somehow that attorney is not going to have time to take your case. Are you getting that sense from some of your clients? They can't find the right attorney?
No, because they know the right questions to ask.
Okay.
So,
but people that come to you and say, I can't find an attorney that will represent me, do you find that that's kind of the two things that they're messing up on, is saying, I'm divorcing a narcissist and I have no money when they're interviewing?
So I have no money is already like, who's gonna, you like, just that, like, forget the narcissist, like, I have no money, then like, what? I mean, unfortunately, divorce costs money, and high conflict divorce costs more money. And so I think that's the problem, is going in and saying, I mean, people are always saying I have no money, and then we're just like, well, then there's free resources, and then they come back and somehow often find money or find something. But I wanted to address what you said about the pit bull attorneys. So I'm sure you've heard of Bill Eddy, like we've all heard of Bill Eddy, but he often talks about, he has the High Conflict Institute, and the goal is to reduce the level of conflict. And when, high conflict isn't often two high conflict people, it's one high conflict person who's creating the problem, and then the other one's just dealing with it. So when you have a pit bull attorney, that's what Bill Eddy would probably call a negative advocate. So negative advocates, which can also be friends and family, they contribute to the conflict by being like, this is what you're entitled to, and this is what you can get, and blah, 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 blah. And instead of like, how can we simmer things down? Because all of that conflict bleeds onto your children. Right. How can we avoid litigation? How can we keep as much power as we can in our own hands outside of the legal system? Like, that's our goal. Yeah. So that's something, I would really want to, have people pay attention to.
Yeah. And the other thing I was going to say is I see this occasionally where somebody has been in a really difficult relationship for sometimes decades, and then they finally get out and they find their voice, and they become unable to compromise, to negotiate, to mediate. They want to exact revenge through the courts on the violence that they experience, or the coercion, or the mental distress that they experienced. And that can be just as damaging as the high conflict partner. There's got to be some give. There's got to be some room to make this come together. And the courts are not going to give you that satisfaction of, righting the wrongs. That's not what family court is about.
And you're going to destroy yourself in the process because the courts don't understand the nature of this. And they'll often come out with like, it takes two to tango. You guys are high conflict. It's both of you that are the problem. So if you come in being like, I need to exact, revenge and justice and all that other stuff, you're going to look like just as much as the problem. So one of the things we do with our clients is work a lot on presentation, having them really deeply understand the best interest factors as well as the alienation factors from Dr. Amy Baker's model. So because they're always getting accused of parental alienation. And
Yes.
sometimes, and so we already prepare for that. They're going to be accused of, alienating the children, even when the other side is doing it. So what does that exactly mean to make sure they're not inadvertently doing it? Because a lot of times people do things without realizing it and they're like, oh no. And then the opposing counsel spins some little thing into some huge bonfire, and you're like, what? But I didn't even like, so it's
Right.
so important. I mean, that's like one of the number one tips is educating yourself. Like instead of being afraid of like, oh, my ex is getting a parental alienation expert. Oh my God, they're like, I know they're accusing you. Of course they're accusing you, but let's figure out exactly what it means so you can make sure you're doing everything right, build a strong defense, but also start building a strong offense because the other side is usually doing it. That's part of the nature of domestic violence. Like I said, money, kids, the court. So the other side, if once they win or whatever, if they don't win in court, they're more apt to put pressure on the kids to create what's called these loyalty conflicts, where it's like, it's me or the other parent. And the kid will often align with the non-safe parent because they're scared. And
Right.
it's a big issue.
Yeah.
So so that needs to be paid attention to.
And I think there's getting to be more awareness of that in a lot of the professional organizations. A lot of the training that attorneys and judges and the regular CEUs and CLEs and all that stuff that people have to carry with different licenses really is starting to look more at that exact kind of dynamic and the whole idea of coercive control. What is domestic violence? What does it look like? And not only that, but the impact of ongoing coercive control or domestic violence on the victim's ability to make good decisions for themselves because they're in post-traumatic stress. And so they may not be in a place that they can make those kind of really healthy decisions because they are in a mental health crisis at the time when they're being asked to make really big decisions for their life. So, Lisa, you had mentioned that one about making sure that you have a great presentation, that you are appearing to be the reasonable parent that's working in the best interests of the kids and trying to be presenting not as a super aggressive, very rigid person. What are some other tips that you would recommend for men or women that are facing these kind of situations?
Yeah. Okay. And so in terms of presentation, we always say we want our clients to be a proactive problem solvers. So when you come in, you're thinking, here's what I'm asking for. Here's why I'm entitled to it. But you have very clear goals and things that you can offer a judge to do that are reasonable, where it's not like you're leaving it up to them to come up with something. So this is for, people later in the process, but a lot of times we have to get into like, what are the goals? And like you said, people are in this crazy crisis state. They can't make good decisions and they don't even know what they want. And so of course they're going to present poorly. So it is important to have resources to help you, focus in on what it is you're asking for that the court can actually give you versus not. And to make strong arguments as to why you need to get it, the visible impact on your kids, your family, et cetera. That's a whole other thing. But some other tips to get through this, like we've been saying, team of support. So this is a really difficult time. Divorce is hard for everybody, but high conflict is even more difficult. And so I know, I don't know if we've talked about this before, but my partner, Chris, came up with the image of a table. And we always say the client is the surface of the table and needs a few legs, as many legs as possible to be as stable throughout this time. And we talk about friends and family as one of the legs of support. But unfortunately, a lot of people in these situations, they don't have friends and family because they've been isolated, or they come from toxic families of origin, or their friends also get so fatigued from hearing, they're like, I don't know what to tell you. And then sometimes they'll say things like, why'd you stay so long? Or why did you put up with this? And it can make people feel worse. But if you have friends and family, great, they love you. But again, sometimes they can be negative advocates because they'll be like, you deserve better, blah, 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 blah. And then that makes things worse. Then the other is the lawyer. The lawyer, we always say during the divorce process, not as much post-judgment. Divorce, you need a lawyer. You need to have someone who knows the law and can build the foundation of your case very strongly, because we know you're going to be back in court. So we want things to be done as right as possible, and never recommend pro se, representing yourself for the divorce process. But a lawyer cannot be your emotional support. Often people spend, like I did, tons of money thinking, well, this person knows the whole story, so every single time something happens, I'm going to call my lawyer. They're not trained for that, and they don't want to do that, most of them. So their goal is to just advocate for you and translate the case into the law, communicate, etc. But that's where that leg ends. Then you have your therapist or domestic violence advocate, somebody who can work on helping you heal. The problem with many of them is they don't understand legal abuse. And so they'll give like poor advice, or they just can't help you. And so we've had clients who are like, I have my therapist and I have you guys, because that way I can really work on my trauma with my therapist and get through the legal abuse part with you guys. So for us, we are like another leg, and we, like I said, we're high conflict divorce strategist. So we do a lot with strategizing. We do a ton with strategic communication, taking strategic oversight, how to present properly, not just in court, but to a custody evaluator. Again, a lot of it involves the art of persuasion. We teach a lot with rhetoric and the art of debate. Because and that's something like negotiation, that's in your daily life. Like, these are skills you can use anywhere. You just learn it like intensely for this part. So, often there's other legs like a real estate person or financial, but having that team of support to walk you through this is so important. It is not something that anyone should do alone. And you have to think too, it's the more self-regulated you can be, like the better you are supported in this process, the better your kids' lives are going to be. Because when a parent is in a really bad place, kids feel it, and then that really can screw them up, where they feel emotionally responsible for you because you're not getting support elsewhere. So I can't emphasize how important it is to get a team of support, not just one person, but and of course, community is really helpful too. We have a weekly legal abuse support group. I always say we do the unusual thing of blending our male and female clients together, because not only did we know that abuse is a human issue, but I think it's important for people to develop empathy for each other. And our clients do that. And it is magical to see how they support each other. And also, our clients tend to be very highly educated. A lot of them are professionals, and they're also super kind. And so they'll share resources with each other. So it makes for this very rich community, and all of them are dealing with the same type of ex. It doesn't matter what their ex is, it's the impact that it has on them. So we do a lot with strategizing, and also the bigger issues, which many people don't talk about, is like, how are my kids going to be okay with a parent like that? And how do I co-parent with someone who doesn't really care about what's best for our kids, put themselves before our kids.
Yeah.
So, I think having that kind of community helps people heal faster, as well as do very, very, be very successful in family court, because they know there's people there that when you have those gut punches, they're going to help, pick you up afterward, and know that that's just part of the process. We often say our clients don't lose, they just give up too soon.
Yeah.
We don't want that to happen.
That is, and so I'm going to throw this in here too. That sense of community has got to be just so empowering, and just so like, oh my gosh, I found people that understand me. Like, I've never been in that particular situation. I've dealt with really toxic people in the workplace, as a in a personal relationship, but never in a marriage. So, or a living, a partner situation. So I can only imagine how just uplifting that's got to be to recognize I'm not the only person and to have that support. And I do want to say, if you are listening to this and you are in this, be really careful about some of the unmonitored kind of, hey, let's go through a divorce and let's talk about how, horrible our partner is. And because those can become that negative cycling stuff where, the group pumps you up and says, don't accept that, go for this. And they have no experience, no education. They're just upset people. So be really careful if you are going in a group that you do something, a group run by professionals and people that specialize in this, like Been There, Got Out. I mean, that's what you guys do for people. And so I just want to, it always scares me when I talk to high conflict clients who are going through a divorce who say, or victims of high conflict divorce situations that say, oh, I'm in a divorce support group. And I'm like, okay, who runs it? And how is it monitored? And what feedback are you getting from that group? Because if it's not healthy, get out.
Yeah. And so with our group, we do it virtually, in person. Our clients are all over the world. So everyone's on something like Zoom, but we're very cautious not to leave any digital footprint. Right. So at the end, the chat goes away. We say that's it, and that's the end. And we also tell our clients not to feel like they ever have to give their contact information to somebody else in the group, but all the people in the group are clients or people that we know. It used to be a little more open, but I really caution against some of the anonymous Facebook groups, because you have to keep in mind that abusers, like everyone plays victim. And they are rampant in the domestic violence community. They even run some major accounts. Yeah. So you have to be very, very careful because, we talk about vulnerable targets. Like when you're going through this and you're putting out your information and other people are helping you, there's others out there who are gathering your information and, can do all kinds of things with it. So it's really important to know who you're actually dealing with.
Right. And that's always my concern about these kind of informal groups or, and they're very well meaning. A lot of the people that run them are doing it very well meaning, but there is no way to actually prove who's in those groups. I mean, obviously if somebody is paying you, they're a client, then you know who you're working with. There's no question about who they are. Anybody can be anybody on social media, not just Facebook, but any of the platforms. And I still really believe this. If you're on any platform where you don't own it or you don't control who's recording or who's doing whatever, who's able to access information, anything you put in there, just think this could, or anything you say, just say this could potentially show up in court. How would this look if this was to come back? Even private messages.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, I've interviewed attorneys who are like, I am scrolling everything that my client's ex is doing. And we've had clients who have been in private Facebook groups and somehow their ex's attorney got screenshots of what was being said. So you never think that a private group is going to protect you. Anything in writing, it stays there.
Yeah. Lisa, this has been fantastic. We've shared a whole bunch of information. I think, you have shared a whole bunch of information and covered some really important topics. If people want to find out more about your services and what you do, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Super easy. Just type in Been There, Got Out. BeenThereGotOut.com is our website. So that's the easiest, but we're on all social media. Our book is the same title, just Been There, Got Out.
Yeah. The book is great. I've read it. I should have had it right here on my desk to hold it up because I do have it. It's great.
Have it.
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
Yes. And we just had this amazing experience. I don't know if you know the comedian Tiffany Haddish. We were at her show a couple of days ago and we were near the front and she started engaging with Chris, and then she asked what he did and we told her and we had the book and she used the book in her act for a few minutes. I was like,
that is so cool. Yeah, and I also want to put in a plug for your podcast. It is fantastic. So make sure you listen to, and it's also called Been There, Got Out.
Right. Yes. Very, very easy.
So make sure you check that out. I will make sure that the notes are below, or the information of how to get hold of Lisa is below. And thank you for listening in, and tune in to our next Spotlight on the Divorce Expert.
Thank you.